Jonathan Reynolds, let's just get clear what happened yesterday. What exactly were the new powers that you acquired?
So, in order to make sure the situation with British Steel wasn't one which I feel would have been catastrophic, I have had to take, on what I intend to be a temporary basis, the power to take control of steel companies in the UK, in this case British Steel, to direct the management, to indemnify them for acting on my behalf. Not issues of ownership, we'll deal with that at a later point, as I explained to Parliament yesterday. It, I think, is already quite a significant intervention. But fundamentally, what does this mean? It means that where the blast furnaces would have gone off irrevocably, and people will perhaps appreciate once a blast furnace is off, it can't be brought back. That would have happened in a matter of days. I've got the power now and have taken the action to take control of the site and to make sure that doesn't happen. And that gives me the chance, and it gives the workers and the community there a chance, and Scunthorpe and British Steel, to find a way for a better future. And my worry had been that we would, frankly, Trevor, be talking right now about thousands and thousands of job losses, and we stopped that happening.
So you're the boss in Scunthorpe now, but just to be absolutely clear, it is not your preference or your intention to take this operation back into public ownership?
Well, that remains an option. And to be frank, as I said to Parliament yesterday, it is perhaps at this stage the likely option. But what we need for any steel site...
Is that because you don't think you can get a commercial private sector partner?
I believe there is a potential for that, and that is my preference, but I feel we've got to find a bridge to that. The kind of investments required for the transition to new steel technology, whichever technology that is, it's a lot of money. It's a lot of capital. Now, you need the government standing behind that. This government has done that with our steel fund. We've put dedicated resources in, a big change from the last government in that regard. But to meet that ourselves, that would be very, very significant. So I want those private sector partners. I've got to address a few things as part of our steel strategy and our industrial strategy, you know, make sure that business environment is right to do so. But what I wasn't willing to have, and what the government wasn't willing to have, and credible support from all my cabinet colleagues, particularly the Prime Minister and Chancellor on this, was to make sure we weren't in a situation where we lost the chance for that transition.
So you think that there probably will be public ownership of this enterprise for a period, but you don't want it forever?
No, that's right, yes. I mean, I think just being absolutely candid about the situation we find ourselves in, if I had a partner to bring in the short term and we could agree a transition plan, that would be preferential. But there was the need to take this action yesterday.
Well, you say the need to take the action. My colleague Ed Conway reported more than a week ago that Jingye would have to place orders for coking coal by this weekend, or the furnaces would run out of fuel. What did you know, or what did you realise on Thursday that you didn't know or realise last Monday?
So the situation on Thursday, the reason it resulted in this fairly dramatic action, it became clear, and because of what we knew, we had made provision to be able to make an offer, to directly purchase raw materials, to pay the money to the company to do that. It became clear that they wouldn't accept any financial offer. I mean, the financial offer I made them was an incredible one in that regard.
But just, you know, clarify the events here. What happened, let's say, on Tuesday or Wednesday that made you think that this is never going to work? Otherwise, why didn't you just take the powers on Monday?
Look, so on Thursday of last week, Thursday, 10th of April, it became clear they would not accept any financial offer, and their intention was to close blast furnaces come what may, and they wanted to keep the downstream mills and supply those directly from China. This was Thursday. By Friday, I had...
When you say it became clear, did they just say that to you, or did you just run out of patience?
We made them a series of very significant offers, and the counter-offer came back in a way no business secretary would have accepted that offer, no government would have accepted the offer.
What did they ask for?
Hundreds of millions of pounds, no conditionality on that, nothing to prevent that money immediately leaving the country, any other assets leaving the country. I think, frankly, they may have come back and asked for additional resources even. It was just not an offer. So this was Thursday. By Friday, we had collective agreement from the Cabinet, tremendous support from colleagues. Saturday, we recalled Parliament and took these powers.
You're saying, essentially, they were deliberately stringing you along?
I can't speak to motivation. I was negotiating in good faith. I believed that we were quite far apart, to be clear. I mean, we made a substantial offer that was comparable to the work we're doing with Tata and Podcal.
It's $500 million you offered them.
Well, yes, effectively, yeah. Their request was for more than double that. So we were quite far apart. But I had never, until fairly recently, had it put to me by them of the option that they would wish to retain. There are 4 very important mills. Network Rail gets 95% of its needs from one of those mills, for instance. That they would wish to keep those, but lose the blast furnaces and supply direct from China. That was a new proposition.
So essentially what they basically said to you is, look, you know what, we're going to keep the parts of this business that are profitable, and we're going to close this bit and import the steel from China. They made that clear.
That's the proposition. Now, when we were talking about a potential co-investment for new technology, these are electric arc furnaces. Yeah. The proposition there, I mean, the kind of conditions I need is not just about agreeing the money, Trevor. I need to know there's going to be job guarantees, that there's security for public money, but crucially, I would have needed to know how would they have supplied those mills, and that had been a difficult part of the negotiation. But you know, there's a good business there in the downstream mills, but the conversation had been about how we transition from blast furnaces to new technology, not the long-term absence of those.
Can we just go a little bit further into what actually happened? Because Jingye is said to be strongly influenced by the Chinese Communist Party. You yourself used some pretty ripe language about the company yesterday. You said it again, bad faith. This morning you said they were extortionists, more or less. Behind this company, do you detect the hand of the Chinese government or the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, look, to run a major Chinese industrial company, there are always direct links to the Chinese Communist Party. I mean, that is, you wouldn't be allowed to run a company in China without that kind of links. I'm not accusing the Chinese state of being directly behind this. I actually think they will understand why we could not accept the proposition that was put to us in terms of losing that essential national capacity. So I'm not alleging some sort of foreign influence and state. I've tried to be really fair to the company. They've lost a lot of money since they came in, I recognise that, but I made absolutely clear to them that the kind of proposition they were putting to us, the closure of the blast furnace, I don't think, by the way, they could have even met their statutory obligations to consult with the workforce about the closure if the raw materials weren't there. I mean, they wouldn't have been meeting how we operate, how companies operate in the UK. So I tried to be really fair to them, but I was absolutely clear that what they were putting forward was not acceptable to me, the Prime Minister, or the British government.
Thank you for being clear about it. And I know that you're not going to be undiplomatic here, but it seems to me that what you are saying is that this is a company which, at the very least, was influenced by wider interests of the Chinese state. And the question then arises, do you feel that you can ever trust a Chinese commercial partner for an enterprise like this, or, for example, on Sidewell C, or any other big piece of infrastructure again?
Look, it's important we don't talk about this company as being representative of every company in China.
But the context, you've already said, the context in which it operates means that it will behave in a particular way.
China is not a market economy as we would be familiar with in our own country or Europe or the US. It's different. So it really comes down to which sectors you think, there's no complications, there's no problems in. Some are more sensitive than others. A lot of UK Chinese trade is in non-contentious areas, agricultural products, life sciences, or automotive. It's not difficult. I think where as a country we've got it wrong in the past. You had a phase, I think the sort of David Cameron, George Osborne phase initially, it was far too naive about some of this. You had a phase, to be frank, under the Conservative government just before they lost office, where they wouldn't engage at all, and that was inappropriate. We're a real outlier. There was no political engagement. The US has some very assertive measures in place to China, but they do have political engagement. So I think the balance was wrong. I think you've got to be clear about what is the sort of sector where actually we can promote and cooperate, and ones, frankly, where we can't. Okay. I wouldn't personally bring a Chinese company into our steel sector.
You would not bring a Chinese company?
I wouldn't. I think steel is a very sensitive area, I don't know the Boris Johnson government when they did this what exactly the situation was, but I think it's a sensitive area.
Sensitive areas. What about nuclear power, for example?
Look, I wouldn't want to, on an interview, make that kind of specific determination, but I think we can't ignore China. I mean, China's a fifth of the global economy. You know, what they do has an impact on us, and where we can have areas where we can cooperate in our mutual interest, I think that is a good.
But there's a high trust bar now, isn't there?
Yes, we've got to recognise that. And again, I don't want people to think that this particular situation is more than just the company itself. But you know, companies operate in different environments. And look, what we were offering to not have to recall Parliament in terms of the offer around raw materials, the British government making sure there'd be no losses if Jingye purchased those, actually then increasing the generosity of that offer. Any company, I think, operating in a sort of rational economic manner would say that we'll take that offer.
All right, look, you've got powers yesterday. Let's talk about how you might use how you might use them. One thing that's puzzling is why don't you just nationalise a business now? Because presumably that might be actually a way of getting a partner. They know the government's already committed.
Look, we'll deal with those issues of ownership as soon as we can. Having asked Parliament to be recalled, to take significant powers, I mean, I'm aware there was huge support across Parliament for the intervention that we took, but, you know, it's a significant situation to ask as a Secretary of State to have these powers. I think it was better to have a more limited bill that didn't deal with issues of ownership. We will have to deal with those issues, and, look, there'll be different options available, but nothing is ruled out. But the immediate need was the intervention to stop the closure of the blast furnaces.
All right. One just quick thing. You're going to be losing. We're losing £700,000 a day on this now. Isn't this deal now exposing the taxpayer to a completely uncapped liability?
So the losses, the annual losses, net losses in the last set of accounts were 233 million. I actually think that can be improved upon, but I am accepting your point that we would expect to lose money on this. I would ask the public to compare that to the option of spending a lot more money to reach a deal that would have seen a lot of job losses and Jingye remain as a partner, or, Trevor, the cost of the complete collapse of British Steel, easily over £1 billion in terms of the need to respond from government to remediate the land, to look after the workforce. I would also say, just to be clear, there is no further borrowing requirement because we have already this resource, this Green Steel Fund allocated to that. There's no impact on the fiscal rules. There's nothing to worry about in that regard.
I know that.
I think, to be absolutely frank, I think supporting British Steel at this time in that way is better than spending a greater deal of money on the complete loss of the business, or in a transition deal where I'd be worried we'd be able to deliver.
Can I just ask you one very quick point, and then I want to talk about tariffs. If you're going to keep this going, you've got to get coking coal. Are you ready to revisit your policy of phasing out coal production, specifically to bypass the environmental objections and allow the mining at Whitehaven in Cumbria? Because if you don't have coking coal, there's no point in all of this. And depending on foreign supplies, again, runs into your issue of national security.
Look, I never want to be dependent on foreign supplies where there's a domestic solution. But just to clear this issue up, because again came up, the Cumbrian coal mine proposition was not material that we could have used at British Steel. British Steel would need a different and additional industrial process to turn that product into something that they can use. And clearly the other thing you'd bear in mind, exactly as you said, there is a shelf life to the blast furnaces. They can't run forever. They've given us a pretty good stint from the 1930s and 50s to now. If you were looking at domestic production, you'd obviously want to make sure there was a long-term position for that. So I'm not sure the demand, frankly, would be there to justify it. But I've always been clear, the whole Cabinet is clear. We will never pursue our objectives on climate, which are really important, in a way which increases emissions overall around the world. We want to make sure it's serious and delivers on our objectives on climate to reduce emissions. That's what our ambitions are about.
All right. Last time we spoke, I asked you how close we were to a trade deal with the United States, and you gave me a knowing smile, which was supposed to convince me, I think, that we're on the edge. But right now, we're still on the 10% naughty step with everybody else. OK, let me ask you again. When do you expect to have a deal?
Look, I can't give a timeline on that.
Days, weeks, months?
I can tell you we remain closely engaged. I had an exchange with my counterpart, Ambassador Greer. Welcome to a message this morning from him. We remain engaged around that. Now,
the president exactly himself, what you did to me before, which is
the president himself. Clearly, is the driving force and the decision maker, as you would expect, entirely right, on the US side. I welcome the pause in the wider tariffs. We did receive a preferential position, but I think I said to you then, I am never going to be satisfied while there are barriers to trade between ourselves and the US, as I would do with any other key market. And I believe there is a way through. The next step is they're going to come back to us on some of the proposals we have put.
Are you disappointed that the special relationship doesn't seem to be that special at all?
Well, I mean, it was special in the sense we were one of only 3 countries who got a preferential rate, but that's disappointing to me still. I'm not satisfied with that because there is no justification, in my view, for putting tariff barriers in place between the UK and the US, further tariff barriers. I think we can reduce those barriers to trade. I think we can get British companies, businesses based in Britain, greater access to the US market in a way that works for them. And we can address some of their concerns, not just in relation to the UK, by the way, but the kind of global trading system they want, a fair, reciprocal one. And that's what we remain committed to doing.
Do we have plans to retaliate if we can't make a deal?
Look, I have to keep all options on the table. I had to give that statement to Parliament to say I've got to take the steps that will give us the chance to do that.
So we could retaliate?
I don't think that is something on either side we would want to see happen. I think the focus should be on positively engaging on the agenda and finding a way through that which improves the terms of trade on what we had, not just removing the threat of anything else. I understand and I appreciate the way this has been an agenda. It's been part of the presidential campaign. This didn't come from left field. He was very clear about that. But the kind of objectives they've got, Trevor, look back to what they're trying to do. If they want a fairer global trading system, show me a more fair example of that than the UK and the US relationship.
Look, I've had some mixed signals from your colleagues who's sitting here about the nature of a trade deal. Can I just ask you, let me just put it like this. Chlorinated chicken, on the table or off the table?
We will never change our SPS food standards. We've made that perfectly clear to the United States as part of our manifesto. That covers meat. It's important to say on agriculture, because this is important to the US. The UK is currently the biggest European importer of US agriculture. Now, there are some things that don't come. They do have parts of their industry that meet our standards, and that's great.
OK, you put aside a bunch of money, £20 billion, to help British exporters cope with these tariffs. Mr Trump says that they're temporary. So why are we going to bung that amount of money? Why not just spend it on, for example, trying to make British businesses more competitive in the EU?
Look,
on productivity. Look, there's lots of priorities.
Every day, Trevor, as well as saving the steel industry, sorting out this trade relationship with the US, we're doing things to improve the business environment.
But you're spending $20 billion on something that's not going to make any difference.
No, we're increasing the support that UK Export Finance offers. UK Export Finance is a brilliant product, by the way, giving them more support to help Britain's businesses export. We're also, by the way, increasing this week access to finance for smaller businesses, an extra set of money for the British Business Bank to do that. We're also reducing some tariffs that business have asked us to reduce on a whole range of areas. We're also the biggest investment in years into the UK this week with the big universal investment in Bedford. So every single day,
the big thing,
we're making the UK more competitive. Yeah. We're delivering for British business. We're sorting out these big issues, but we're never forgetting the smaller stuff.
Yeah, you've got your own roller coaster. Can I just ask you very, very finally, just a very, in a sense, a personal question. You represent a constituency which was at the centre of the cotton industry. Huge thing, textiles and all that. Yeah. A century ago, everybody could see that it was over. Now, back then, you wouldn't have put a load of money into what was a dying industry. You're about to do that in relation to steel. Why don't you just admit that it's over?
Oh, you've lined me up on this one. Steel is not a sunset industry. Right? Steel is integral to a modern economy. Look around you. Look at everything that's part of everyday life. Steel is part of that. A lot of people assume it is like the mines or the shipyards, and they've got that wrong.
We produce less than 1% of world production.
Yeah, but we look at other European countries. If Sweden and Germany and other countries can produce steel and have that, we would have been, by the way, without this action from the government at the weekend, yesterday, the only G20 country without the ability to make steel. So just think, have everyone else got it wrong? Or were we almost in a position where we got it wrong? So look, it's important to understand this is about the modern economy, it's about the transition to net zero, it's about making sure that we, yes, defend the economic security of the UK, but don't think there's not a commercial demand. Demand for steel is going up in the UK, partly because of the building boom for houses and infrastructure this government's bringing about.
Jonathan Reynolds, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.